Emily Carter hadn't been home in 10 years. The drive back to Ridgefield felt longer than it ever had, even though the highway was nearly empty that late afternoon. The autumn air was sharp, the trees painted in deep orange and gold, their leaves falling softly like quiet reminders of time passing. She kept the window slightly open, letting the cool breeze touch her face. It smelled like wood, rain, and a little bit of home. She had left this town right after college, chasing a life she thought she needed. A life filled with noise, new cities, and people who talked too fast. But in those 10 years, something inside her had gone silent. The messages from her father had grown shorter each year. The last one, months ago, was just 5 words. "The house misses you, M." That was all it took to bring her back. When she reached the old Carter house, the sun was setting behind it, turning the windows gold. The white paint had peeled in places, the porch creaked when she stepped on it, and the small wind chime by the door still sang the same soft tune her mother had hung there decades ago. Emily stood there for a moment, frozen, her suitcase beside her. The air carried a mix of comfort and ache, the kind of feeling you get when you realize how much you've missed something you tried to forget. Then the door opened. Her father, Daniel Carter, stood there. He looked older, his hair now mostly silver, his shoulders a bit stooped. But his eyes, kind and steady, hadn't changed. "You actually came," he said softly, almost in disbelief. Emily smiled nervously. "You invited me, didn't you?" He gave a quiet chuckle. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes this time." She wanted to hug him, but something about their distance felt too big for that, at least for now. Instead, she followed him inside. The smell of old books and cedar wood wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. Everything looked the same, the bookshelf full of his stories. The clock that ticked just a little too loudly. The same armchair he used to read in. "I made tea," he said, placing a cup on the kitchen table. "Still, take it with honey." Emily nodded. "You remember?" "I remember everything," Daniel said quietly. They sat across from each other, unsure where to start. So much time had passed, and yet beneath the awkwardness, there was something tender, something still alive. "So," Daniel said after a while, "how's city life treating you?" "It's fine," she answered. It wasn't. But she didn't want to explain the long nights, the loneliness of her small apartment, or how she had started to miss the sound of her father's old typewriter more than the city lights. Daniel studied her face carefully, noticing the small tiredness in her eyes. "You look different," he said. "Not bad different. Just older. Wiser, maybe?" She smiled faintly. "You look older, too." He laughed softly. "That's fair." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but heavy with memories. Emily's gaze fell on the small framed photo on the counter. It was of her mother, smiling in the garden. The sight made her throat tighten. "It still feels strange without her here," she whispered. Daniel's face softened. "It always will." Silence again, but not cold. It's just real. The kind that comes when two people are learning how to be close again after years apart. That evening, Emily walked through the house slowly, touching things she hadn't seen in so long. Her old bedroom still had the pale blue walls she'd painted in high school. The window overlooked the same maple tree where she used to climb as a kid. She noticed a small shelf filled with books, her childhood favorites still neatly arranged. Her father had kept everything exactly the same. It felt like he'd been waiting quietly for her to come back. When she came downstairs, Daniel was sitting by the fireplace, a notebook open on his lap. He looked up, smiling gently. "I still write," he said, tapping the page. "Stories keep me company." Emily sat on the couch nearby. "You used to read them to me," she said. "You remember the one about the girl who found a magic key?" Daniel nodded, his eyes lighting up. And she opened a door to her old memories. "You used to make me tell that one over and over." "I liked how it ended," she said softly. She realized the key wasn't for a door. It was for her heart. Daniel smiled at that. "You remembered—" "I remember everything too," she whispered. The fire crackled gently. The warmth filled the room, soft and golden. For the first time in years, Emily felt calm. the kind of calm that only home can give. But beneath that peace, something stirred. Not something dark, just something different. She looked at her father, at how quietly he carried himself, how kindness seemed to sit naturally in his voice. She had forgotten how safe he made her feel, how much of her strength had come from him. Later that night, lying in her old bed, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint sounds of the house, the wind through the trees, the ticking of the clock downstairs, the creak of her father's chair as he moved. It was strange how something could feel both distant and familiar at the same time. The next morning, she woke up early to the smell of pancakes. Her father was already in the kitchen, humming quietly. "You still like them with blueberries, right?" he asked. She laughed. "You remember that too?" "I told you," he said, smiling. "Some things you don't forget." As they ate breakfast, Emily looked out the window at the garden, the same one her mother used to care for. The flowers had grown wild now, but they were still beautiful. "You kept it alive," she said. Daniel looked out too. She would have wanted that. Something in his voice made her chest tighten, a soft sadness, the kind that never really fades. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You did good, Dad," she said. He looked at her hand, then at her. "So did you." For a moment, neither moved. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. A bridge rebuilt, a quiet forgiveness. As the day went on, they talked more easily. They laughed about old memories, the time Emily painted the dog blue by accident, the night they camped in the living room because of a storm. The distance between them slowly began to fade. When the sun began to set, they sat on the porch together, watching the light fade behind the trees. The air was cool and still. Emily leaned back in her chair and said, "I think I needed this more than I realized." Daniel nodded. "So did I." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of maple leaves. For a while, they didn't speak at all. There was no need to. That night, as Emily closed her eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace mixed with a quiet ache, the kind that comes when the past begins to heal. She didn't know what the coming days would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Because even though their bond had changed, and even though the years had taken their toll, she was home. And sometimes, that's all a heart needs to start beating freely again. The days after Emily's return passed faster than she expected. She had planned to stay only a week, just long enough to help her father fix a few things around the house and then go back to her city life. But the house and her father had a quiet pull. Every morning she woke up to the sound of his coffee pot, the smell of pine trees outside, and the soft hum of his old radio playing gentle tunes from the past. It felt peaceful in a way she had forgotten existed. Daniel seemed lighter with her there. He talked more, smiled more. He had always been a quiet man, but now there was warmth in his voice again. They spent their mornings working together, mending the broken fence, sorting through old boxes in the attic, or just walking around the small garden that had started to bloom again. The air between them carried both comfort and something new, something neither could name. One evening, after dinner, Daniel pulled out a deck of cards. "Remember this?" he asked, grinning. Emily laughed. "Oh no, not your magic tricks again." He chuckled. "Come on, Em, one last game." It was something they used to do when she was little. Play card games and make up stories about the cards they drew. It was their private world, a mix of imagination and laughter. But this time, sitting across from him at the old kitchen table, the game felt different. There was no childish laughter or pretending. It was quiet, gentle, filled with looks that said more than words could. As they played, Emily caught herself studying him, the lines on his face, the calm way he moved, the soft smile that appeared whenever she laughed. She realized how much she had missed being seen this way. Not judged, not rushed, just seen. Daniel noticed her too. The little girl he once carried on his shoulders was gone. In her place was a woman, strong, tired, kind. He couldn't help but feel proud of her. And yet, something deeper stirred in him. A strange mix of affection, nostalgia, and longing for time that had slipped away too fast. They talked as they played. About her work, her friends, her plans. about how lonely the house had been after she left. "I used to sit right here," he said quietly, "and listen to the clock tick. I'd think about calling you, but I never wanted to sound like I was holding you back." Emily's eyes softened. "You never held me back, Dad. I just got lost for a while." He smiled sadly. "We all do." The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the night had grown darker, the wind brushing softly against the windows. Emily leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that people can love too much? Like, so much that it hurts?" Daniel looked at her, surprised by the question. "Love's supposed to hurt a little," he said after a pause. "That's how you know it's real." Something about his answer stayed with her. It wasn't romantic, not in the way stories describe, but it was deep, mature, and full of unspoken truth. They played another round of cards. This time Emily won, and she grinned with pride. "Finally beat you," she teased. He laughed. "Guess I'm losing my touch. Or maybe I'm just better now," she said, smiling. "That's how it's supposed to be," Daniel replied softly. "You're meant to grow past me." The words hit her harder than he knew. She didn't want to grow past him. She just wanted to feel close again, the way they used to. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the moonlit garden, thinking about how easy it had been to fall back into old rhythms. The laughter, the small talks, the warmth of his company. But now, as an adult, those same moments carried new weight. Her heart felt both safe and uncertain, as if she was walking a thin line between love and something else she couldn't name. The next morning, Daniel found her sitting at the kitchen table, sketching something in a notebook. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I started drawing the garden. It's peaceful," he smiled, pouring coffee for both of them. "You always had an artist's eye." They sat in quiet comfort, the kind that doesn't need words. Every so often, their eyes met, and every time they did, it lingered just a moment too long. Later that day, rain began to fall. They stayed indoors, reading and cooking together. Emily found an old photo album in the living room covered in dust. As she flipped through it, she found pictures of her as a little girl, her first bike ride, her first school play, and one of her sitting on her father's shoulders, both of them laughing. Daniel looked over her shoulder. "You always made me laugh," he said softly. She smiled. "You were the best dad," he chuckled. "Past tense." "Still are," she said quickly, and they both laughed. But as the laughter faded, their eyes met again, quiet, full of memory. Later, while they cooked dinner, she teased him about his bad chopping skills. He pretended to be offended, and soon they were both laughing again. The kitchen filled with warmth, not just from the stove, but from something unspoken between them. After dinner, they sat in the living room with tea. The rain outside had turned into a soft drizzle. Emily looked at the fire and said, "Do you ever think we stopped being us?" "Somewhere along the way." Daniel looked thoughtful. "Maybe, or maybe we just forgot how to listen to each other." She nodded slowly. "I want to fix that." He smiled gently. "So do I." As the night grew deeper, the air in the room changed, not tense, just tender. They spoke about life, about choices, about what it meant to love someone and still let them go. Emily felt her heart tighten in a way she couldn't explain. She looked at her father, really looked, and saw not just the man who raised her, but a soul who had lived through loneliness, loss, and love. When she reached for her teacup, her hand brushed his. It was a small thing, a light touch, but it sent a quiet shiver through her chest. Daniel froze for half a second, then smiled gently and moved his hand away, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he understood. Neither spoke about it. They didn't need to. Some feelings didn't need words, and some boundaries were best kept sacred. When Emily went to bed that night, she felt her heart full, not with confusion, but with gratitude. The games they played, the laughter, the looks, they had reminded her of something precious. Love could change, grow, take new shapes, but it could still be pure. She thought of their old game, guessing what the other was thinking. Maybe, she thought, he already knew, because the truth was simple and deep. Sometimes love between two hearts doesn't fit into simple names. Sometimes it just is quiet, complicated, and endlessly human. As the rain whispered outside and the house fell silent, Emily smiled to herself. Maybe some games aren't childish at all. Maybe they're just ways the heart tries to remember how to love again. And again, the rain had stopped by morning, leaving the garden fresh and bright. The air smelled of wet leaves and coffee. Emily stood by the kitchen window, watching her father work outside. He was trimming the bushes, moving slowly but steadily. Wearing his old flannel jacket and that same quiet focus she remembered from childhood. Something about the scene made her heart ache. Not in sadness, but in nostalgia. It felt like time had folded in on itself, letting her watch a piece of her old life play again. When he came inside, wiping his hands, he smiled at her. "You're up early again. I like mornings here," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. "They feel honest." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." He took a sip and leaned against the counter. "You were never a morning person before. Guess City. Life changed me," she said with a shrug. He looked at her thoughtfully. "City life changes a lot of people. Doesn't mean it makes them happier." Emily didn't answer right away. He was right. Her city job, her busy days, her endless search for meaning, none of it had filled the quiet space in her heart. Coming home had reminded her of that space, of something she had left behind without realizing it. Later that day, while cleaning out the study, Emily found a dusty notebook tucked under a pile of old newspapers. It was leather-bound, with her father's neat handwriting on the first page. She opened it carefully. Inside were short stories, beautiful, lonely stories about love, regret, and missed chances. One story caught her eye. It was about a man who watched his daughter grow up too fast and leave. The story ended with him sitting in her empty room, whispering her name to the silence. By the time she finished reading, her eyes were wet. She closed the notebook slowly, her heart heavy. Her father hadn't just missed her, he had carried her absence like a shadow for years. That evening, while they had dinner, she asked, "Dad, do you still write stories about real people?" He looked up from his plate. "Sometimes. But mostly, they write themselves." Ooh. She smiled sadly. "I read the one about the father and the daughter." He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "That one wasn't meant for you to find." "I know," she said softly, "but I'm glad I did." They sat in silence for a moment. The air was thick with unspoken words. Emily reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "You were lonely, weren't you?" Daniel looked down at their hands. "Lonely doesn't begin to describe it," he said. "But I learned to live with it. Some people leave holes you just learn to walk around." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry." He shook his head gently. "Don't be. You were living your life. That's what I wanted for you." But his voice carried a quiet sadness that told her it hadn't been easy for him to let her go. That night, Emily couldn't sleep again. She sat by the fire, the notebook open on her lap. Her father had written about love in a way she had never seen before, tender, patient, and full of forgiveness. Reading his words, she began to see him differently, not just as her father, but as a man who had once loved deeply, lost deeply, and never stopped hoping for something to hold on to. When Daniel came downstairs, he found her still awake. "You should rest," he said softly. "I was reading your stories again," she said. "You write about love like it's both a gift and a wound." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." She looked at him quietly. "You ever wish you'd fallen in love again?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "No. Your mother was enough. After her, I didn't need more. I just missed the feeling of being understood." Something about that answer struck Emily deep. She understood that feeling too well. She missed being understood, being seen for who she was beneath everything else. "Maybe," she said softly, "that's what love really is. Finding someone who understands you." He nodded slowly. "And keeping them, if you can." They sat by the fire for a long time, the warmth wrapping around them like a soft blanket. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was the kind that happens K. Between two people who share the same loneliness. The next morning. They worked together on fixing the old bookshelf in the living room. While Daniel hammered the nails, Emily organized the books. Her fingers brushed against old photo albums, letters, and pieces of her childhood. Everything in that house carried a piece of their story, their laughter, their distance, their quiet love. At one point, she looked up and said, "You know, when I was little, I used to think you were a superhero. You could fix anything." Daniel smiled. "I tried, but not everything can be fixed." "Maybe not," she said softly, "but you made things better." He looked at her then, eyes warm, full of pride and tenderness. "You have no idea how much it means hearing that." There it was again, that quiet connection between them, gentle but powerful. It wasn't romantic. It was deeper, the kind of emotional bond that blurs the lines between past and present, between parent and child, between love that once protected and love that now simply understands. That evening, they sat outside on the porch as the sun went down. The sky was streaked with gold and pink, and the air was calm. Daniel handed her a cup of tea. "You've grown up," he said softly, "but sometimes I still see the little girl who used to chase fireflies in the yard." Emily smiled faintly. "And sometimes I still feel like her." He chuckled. "Good. Don't lose that part of you." They watched the sky for a while. Then she said, "Do you ever feel like we're both standing on different sides of time?" He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe, but right now we're on the same side. That's what matters." Something in his words made her heart swell with emotion. She wanted to hold on to that moment forever. The warmth, the peace, the closeness that years of silence hadn't destroyed. As night fell, she felt a quiet truth settle inside her. Their bond had changed. It wasn't the simple love of father and daughter anymore. It had matured into something richer, a deep understanding between two souls who had both been broken and healed by life. Later, when she went to bed, Emily wrote in her journal, "Sometimes love doesn't fade. It just changes shape." She thought of her father, of the man he was, of the years they had lost and the closeness they had found again. He wasn't just her father anymore, he was her mirror, her reminder that love could exist without needing to be defined. In the quiet of her room, she smiled to herself. The line between past and present had blurred, but maybe that was okay. Maybe that's how healing worked, not by separating what was from what is, but by letting them meet in the middle, and in that soft space between memory and now. Emily finally felt at peace. The days in Ridgefield began to move quietly, toward goodbye. Emily could feel it, that gentle ache that comes before leaving something you love. The house had started to feel alive again, full of laughter, light, and memories that had been asleep for years. But the closer she got to the day she had to leave, the heavier her heart became. One morning, she found her father sitting on the porch, reading one of his old notebooks. The sunlight fell across his face, highlighting every wrinkle and every trace of wisdom that life had given him. He looked peaceful, like a man who had made peace with time. "You're up early," she said, sitting beside him. He smiled. "Couldn't sleep. I was reading the story you liked, the one about the man who found his daughter again." Emily looked at him softly. "You really wrote that about us, didn't you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I think every story I've written was about us in some way." They sat quietly for a while. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. Emily wanted to freeze the moment. The warmth of the morning, the calmness of his voice, the comfort of just being near him. "Dad," she said finally, "I don't think I realized how much I missed this." "Missed you." He turned toward her. "I missed you too, Em. More than I ever said." She leaned her head against his shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. It felt safe, like the world couldn't touch them. But behind that comfort was a truth they both felt. She couldn't stay forever. Life would pull her back, and the house would grow quiet again. That afternoon, they started sorting through old boxes in the attic. Inside were photo albums, letters, and small pieces of their shared past, a drawing Emily made in first grade. Her mother's favorite scarf, a birthday card with a childish signature, Each object held a memory, and each memory carried both joy and sadness. Daniel picked up a photograph, one of Emily in her graduation gown. "You looked so proud that day," he said softly. "I was," she replied, "because you were in the front row clapping louder than anyone else." He smiled faintly. "I still remember that feeling. Watching you walk across that stage, it felt like watching my heart grow wings." Her eyes grew misty. "You always knew how to say things that stick." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe that's what fathers are for." The attic fell silent again, except for the sound of boxes shifting. Then Emily found something that made her pause. A small wooden box carved with her initials. Inside was a folded note she had written to her father when she was 10. It said, "I'll never stop loving you, no matter how old I get." She smiled through tears. "You kept this." "Of course," he said. "It's one of the few promises that never broke." She sat there holding the note, realizing that time had changed many things: her life, her dreams, her view of the world, but not the love between them. It had only grown quieter, deeper, and more forgiving. That night they had dinner outside under the fading light. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, and the first stars began to appear. The air was cool and soft, filled with the hum of crickets. "This house feels alive again," Daniel said, sipping his tea. Emily smiled. "That's because it finally has two people in it." He nodded slowly. "You brought laughter back." "You brought me back." She looked at him, her heart full and heavy at the same time. "Then maybe I shouldn't go." Turned to her gently. "Emily, you have to. The world needs you. I'll be fine, but I don't want to leave you alone again." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not leaving me. You're just moving forward. And that's what love does. It doesn't hold on too tight." His words settled deep in her chest. She knew he was right, but that didn't make it easier. Sometimes love means walking away while your heart wants to stay. Later, as the night deepened, they sat in the living room by the fire one last time. Emily asked him to read her one of his stories. He smiled, opened his notebook, and began to read. His voice was calm and full, carrying the warmth of years gone by. It was a story about two souls who met in a lifetime, drifted apart, and found their way back, not as they were, but as who they had become. When he finished, Emily whispered, "That's beautiful." He looked at her quietly. "It's our story, isn't it?" She nodded. "It is." They didn't say much after that. Sometimes silence says everything words can't. The next morning her bags were packed. The sun was bright and the garden shimmered with dew. Daniel was already waiting by the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You sure you've got everything?" he asked. "Everything that matters," she said softly. They stood side by side, sipping their coffee, neither wanting to be the first to speak about goodbye. Finally, Daniel said, "You know, I used to think being a good father meant protecting you from the world. But now I think it means letting you face it and trusting you'll be okay." Emily blinked back tears. "You did both." He smiled. "Then I guess I did all right." When she hugged him, it wasn't a light hug. It was long and full of unspoken love. He held her close, whispering, "Don't forget where home is." "I won't," she said against his shoulder. "It's not just this house. It's you." She got in her car, rolling down the window as he waved. The drive away from Ridgefield felt slower than when she came. Every turn of the road carried memories: the porch, the laughter, the warmth. As the town faded in her rearview mirror, Emily smiled through her tears. She realized something important. Love doesn't always need to be loud or constant. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and made of small moments that stay in your heart forever. Back in the city, she hung one of her father's stories on her wall. It reminded her of everything she had learned, that love can change, but it never disappears. It simply becomes part of who you are. Weeks later, she received a letter from her father. It was short, written in his familiar handwriting. "The house feels lighter now. Maybe because it knows you're at peace. Keep writing your story, Em. I'll be reading it from here." She read it 3 times, smiling softly. Then she placed it in her journal beside her childhood note. 2 promises from different times, both unbroken. That night, she went to bed with the window open. the sound of city wind carrying faint echoes of home. In her heart, Ridgefield wasn't gone. It lived quietly inside her, every laugh, every tear, every word they hadn't said. Because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're beginnings disguised as farewells. And in that truth, Emily finally understood what her father meant by letting go while holding on. It wasn't about leaving someone behind. It was about carrying them forward, wherever life led. Love, she realized, wasn't about keeping someone close. It was about keeping them within you. And as she drifted to sleep, she whispered, "I'm home, Dad, always."